My daughter-in-law said it was her living room, so I took everything that was mine. I never imagined that the woman I welcomed into my family would one day stand in my own living room, point toward my furniture, and say, "This is our space now." She said it so casually that, for a moment, I honestly thought I had misunderstood her. I had spent 32 years building that home. Every chair, every painting, every piece of furniture had a story behind it. Some things had belonged to my late husband. Others were gifts from my parents. Some I had bought with money I had saved for years. But my daughter-in-law, Emily, looked around the room as if none of that mattered. Then she smiled and said, "Mom, you need to understand something. This is our living room now." I looked at my son, Daniel. He was standing behind her. He didn't say anything. That silence hurt more than her words. I nodded slowly. "All right," I said. Emily smiled, apparently satisfied that she had won. What she didn't know was that she had just made the biggest mistake of her life, because she thought she had taken control of my home. She had no idea that I was about to take back everything that was mine, and I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to fight. I wasn't even going to ask permission. I was simply going to let the truth speak for itself. My name is Margaret Wilson, and this is the story of how my own family taught me the difference between being loved and being useful. When Daniel was 8 years old, his father died. It was the hardest day of my life. Suddenly, I was a widow and a single mother. There were bills to pay, a mortgage to maintain, and a frightened little boy who didn't understand why his father wasn't coming home. I worked 2 jobs for several years. During the day, I worked at a small accounting office. In the evenings, I cleaned offices downtown. I would come home exhausted, but Daniel would be waiting at the kitchen table with his homework. I never complained. I wanted him to have the childhood he deserved. Eventually, I managed to pay off the mortgage. That house became more than a building. It became proof that I had survived. Every room carried memories. The living room had the old leather sofa my husband bought before Daniel was born. The wooden cabinet had belonged to my mother. The dining table was something I purchased with my first major paycheck. The paintings on the walls were collected over decades. Nothing in that house was accidental. Then Daniel met Emily. At first, I liked her. She was charming, confident, and affectionate. She called me Mom within a few weeks. I thought I had gained a daughter. When Daniel told me they were getting married, I cried tears of happiness. I wanted to give them everything. So when they asked if they could stay with me temporarily after the wedding, I immediately agreed. "Of course," I said, "your family." They moved into the guest room. I gave them the larger closet. I cleared shelves in the bathroom. I even converted part of my home office into a small dressing area for Emily. I didn't mind. I thought it was temporary. Then temporary became 6 months. 6 months became a year. And slowly, the house began changing. Emily started moving my things without asking. One afternoon, I came home and discovered that my mother's antique lamp had disappeared from the living room. "Where is the lamp?" I asked. Emily looked up from her phone. "Oh, that old thing, I put it in storage. It didn't match our style." "Our style?" I didn't respond. A few weeks later, she replaced the curtains, then the cushions, then the photographs. One day I walked into the living room and realized there were almost no signs left that the room belonged to me. I asked Daniel about it. "Mom, she's just decorating." "It's my house." "I know." "Then why does she keep changing everything?" Daniel sighed. "Please don't make this a big deal." That sentence became familiar. Whenever Emily crossed a boundary, Daniel asked me not to make it a big deal. When she used my credit card accidentally 3 times, I was told not to make it a big deal. When she invited 20 people over without asking, I was told not to make it a big deal. When she complained about my cooking, I was told not to make it a big deal. I kept swallowing my feelings because he was my son. And mothers have a dangerous habit of forgiving people simply because they love the person standing beside them. Then came the day everything changed. I had just returned from grocery shopping when I heard Emily talking to a friend. She didn't realize I was standing in the hallway. "This is basically our house now," she said. "My mother-in-law still acts like she owns everything." Her friend laughed. Emily continued, "Honestly, once we have children, she'll probably move out anyway." I stood there silently. My heart sank. I had been treating them like they were building their future in my home. They had apparently been planning their future without me. That evening I said nothing, but I began thinking. The next morning I went to my office and opened a folder I hadn't touched in years. Inside were the original property documents. My name was on everything: the mortgage, the deed, the insurance, the utilities, everything. Then I looked through another box: receipts, photographs, old purchase documents, my husband's will, my mother's estate records. I realized something important. Emily didn't understand the difference between living somewhere and owning it, and neither did Daniel. A week later, Emily decided to make the distinction even clearer. She came downstairs while I was sitting in the living room. "Mom," she said, "we need to talk about the furniture." I looked at her. "What furniture?" "This living room," she gestured around. "Daniel and I want to redesign it." I smiled. "That's interesting. We've been here long enough. This is basically our living room." I said nothing. She continued, "I want to get rid of this old sofa and the cabinet and that dining set." I stared at her. "The cabinet belonged to my mother, I know, and the sofa belonged to my husband. I understand, but we're trying to make the house feel modern." Then she said the sentence I would never forget. "You need to understand that this is our living room now." I looked at Daniel. He was standing near the stairs. "Is that what you think?" I asked him. He looked uncomfortable. "Mom, no, just answer me." He hesitated. Then he said quietly, "We live here." I nodded. "All right." Emily smiled. She thought I was surrendering, but I had already made my decision. The next morning I called a moving company. I didn't tell them everything. I simply gave them a list: my husband's sofa, my mother's cabinet, the dining table, the paintings, the lamps, the antique clock, my father's bookshelf, the crystal dishes, every family heirloom, everything I had purchased, everything that belonged to me. On Saturday morning, 3 movers arrived. Emily walked downstairs and froze. "What is happening?" I calmly answered. "I'm moving my belongings." She laughed. "Moving them where?" "Into storage." She looked at Daniel. "Tell her to stop." Daniel came downstairs. "Mom, what's going on?" I handed him a folder. "These are the property records and receipts." He opened it. "I don't understand." "You don't need to understand. You only need to know that everything being removed belongs to me." Emily's face changed. "You can't do this." I looked at her. "Actually, I can." "But this is our living room," she shouted. I smiled. "No, Emily, this was my living room long before you moved in." The movers continued. The sofa disappeared, then the cabinet, then the dining table. The paintings came off the walls. The crystal dishes were carefully packed. The antique clock was wrapped in blankets. Emily stood there watching. She looked furious. "You're trying to punish us." "No," I said. "I'm simply taking back what is mine." Daniel looked at the nearly empty room. "Mom, where are we supposed to sit?" I looked at him. "I don't know." He stared at me. "You're really doing this," I answered quietly. "You were comfortable telling me it was your living room. I thought you should experience what that means when the person who actually owns the room takes her things away." Emily stormed upstairs. She began packing her belongings. Daniel followed her. For the first time in years, the house was silent. Not peaceful, just silent. That night Daniel came to my room. "Mom, can we talk?" I nodded. He sat down. "I didn't realize you felt this way." I looked at him. "You didn't realize because you never asked." He lowered his eyes. "I love you. I love you too." "Then why are you doing this?" I took a deep breath. "Because loving you doesn't mean allowing someone to erase me from my own life." I continued. "I gave you a home because I loved you. I shared my space because I trusted you. I helped you because you were my son. But somewhere along the way, you started treating my generosity like an obligation." He wiped his eyes. "I was wrong." Those words were the first honest words I had heard from him in a long time. The next morning, Daniel and Emily moved into an apartment. I didn't stop them. I didn't celebrate. I simply watched my son carry boxes out of the house. Before he left, he turned around. "Mom, yes, can I come back?" I smiled. "Of course, you're my son." He hugged me, and for the first time in months I felt like I had my son back. Not my tenant, not my financial responsibility, not a man caught between his wife and mother. My son. Few weeks later, Daniel visited me alone. He sat in the living room. The sofa was back. My mother's cabinet was polished. The old clock was ticking again. He looked around. "It feels like home," I smiled. It always was, he nodded. Then he said something that stayed with me. Emily thought you were weak because you never fought back. I laughed softly. Sometimes people mistake patience for weakness. Daniel smiled. What changed? I looked around the room. Nothing changed. I just remembered who I was. That was the real revenge. I didn't destroy my son's marriage. I didn't humiliate Emily. I didn't throw her belongings into the street. I didn't scream or threaten anyone. I simply stopped allowing people to take advantage of my kindness. Sometimes revenge isn't about hurting someone. Sometimes revenge is simply refusing to be treated badly anymore. Months later, Emily apologized. She admitted that she had become entitled. She said she had mistaken my generosity for permission. I accepted her apology, but I also established boundaries. They could visit whenever they wanted. They could stay for dinner. They could bring their future children to my home, but the house remained mine. And that was not an act of revenge. It was an act of self-respect. I learned something important from that experience. Family doesn't give you permission to disrespect someone. Love doesn't require you to surrender your dignity. And kindness should never be confused with weakness. If you give someone a place in your life, they should appreciate it. They shouldn't start believing they own the place you gave them. Today, when I sit in my living room, I sometimes remember Emily's words. This is our living room now. And I smile, because she was right about one thing. It was a living room, but she was wrong about whose it was. It was mine. It had always been mine. And when someone forgot that, I didn't need revenge. I only needed to take back what I had worked my entire life to earn. Sometimes the strongest revenge is not destroying someone else's life. It's taking back your own.